You're listening to The Human Frequency on American Freedom Radio. It's a very high energy day here in the mountains of southern Kern County in California. Gabe and I are fully recovered from contact in the desert and had our first public transportation experience on Kern County Transit yesterday. Quite a different ride from the Red Line to Hollywood from downtown LA.
Well, I think the most noticeable difference is when I sit down in a seat, I'm not sitting in someone else's urine, and I have that on my pants for the rest of the day.
You got to do a moisture test.
Ah, yes, the fabled moisture test.
It's not fabled, man. You have to do it. If you ride public transportation in LA, that's like one of the first things you got to learn.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I think the funniest thing is that, we lived in Hollywood for a couple years, and then we move out here thinking we're going to get away from it all. And, we ride the 210 bus up and down Vine Street in LA, and we move up here. And what's our line number? Of course, the 210.
I know, it's kind of ironic. It's quite a different ride, though. I mean, in LA, for instance, we've had to evacuate a bus before because someone vomited all over the back of it. And they made us all get out of the bus. They took the bus out of commission and brought us another bus. That, I don't think that happens here, but maybe in Bakersfield. I don't know. Bakersfield's kind of funky.
Yeah, what was it in Spinal Tap where they're saying you can't dust for vomit?
No, but you can choke on your own vomit.
Or someone else's vomit.
Yeah. Well, here the public transportation was quite civilized. The price was the same. It was $1.75. We're just riding around Fraser Park area. It's kind of funny to live in a mountain community and still be able to take a bus. I think it's kind of underrated. Literally nobody between the ages of 16 and 65 rides this thing.
Except us.
Yeah, but it was great. It's sort of like taking a little bit of the city with us to the mountains.
Yes, and the part of the city we don't take with us is that no one in there is on their cell phone blaring Katy Perry or something.
Yeah, but the bus driver still played MK Ultra Illuminati music.
That's true. Well, they have to slip it in there somehow.
I guess when you're on the bus, you have to listen to terrible music.
It is pretty much a prerequisite. I never thought of it that way, but that makes sense.
Right. Well, anyway, it was fun. We met an old lady on the bus. She was very sweet. Is it okay to say old lady? She was elderly.
Older.
Older
lady.
Okay. Well, she was 35 years older than me. She was very sweet. And she grew up in the same community in Los Angeles that I did, which I thought was funny. We even went to the same high school. Seems like everybody up here is from LA.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, the bus was cool. It was fun. They're going to raise the rates on us, of course. That's what they always do. They have hearings and they say, come to the hearing and give us your voice. And then they say, okay, we're not listening to you. Like at the LA Metro hearing that we went to.
Come to the hearing and waste your time.
Right. So we went to the LA Metro hearing and we wore suits and I looked like a lawyer. And I went up there and gave my 2 cents to the city council in Los Angeles. And of course, they didn't care. They raised the rates anyway. That's
by
fine.
A lot more than 2 cents, by the way.
Right. Here in Kern County, they're going to raise the rates by, 25 cents. The fare structure is confusing. Every ride is a different cost. Our ride was $1.75, just like in LA. But on the plus side, if you're going from Arvin to Weed Patch, it's only 50 cents.
Well, the fact that they have confusing fares that says something. If two people who are years of age are going to get confused by it, then imagine how the people who are in their 60s and 70s must feel. So, they should really do something about that.
Well, whatever the case is, they are lowering fares for seniors. And that's pretty much who takes the bus. So I guess we'll be paying for them. Anyways.
I can't wait to be a senior.
Yeah, well, there's not going to be any Social Security anymore when we're seniors.
Ah, damn it.
But it doesn't matter because you've registered your business entity. Your legal name is a business entity.
That's true.
And you don't pay any taxes, so you're never going to get any Social Security.
And I don't have to pay any taxes, and neither do you. And neither do our business entities.
Well, so here's the wonderful thing about that is you can save up your own money for retirement. You don't need mommy and daddy in the government to babysit you.
Yeah, and you don't need them to just hoard it and decide at any given moment that they're just going to take it and everyone else is SOL, as the saying goes.
So this week was very interesting energetically. Something happened in the world. There was a false flag attack again.
Again? Another one?
Well, yeah, you heard it. We were listening to
that's right.
Anderson Cooper breaking into false emotion, and we listened to Lady Gaga reading the list of the victims of the false flag. Now, false flag is not a hoax. A false flag, people really do die during these things. It's perpetrated by our government, but people die. During a hoax, that's just actors. I think people really died during this, and I think it's terrible. And I think that the so-called elite just play with us, with our lives, like we don't matter. But that's why we're here. That's why we're here on the human frequency, to
Mm-hmm.
help to raise the vibration so that that stuff doesn't happen. And when it does happen, because it's still going to happen a little bit, at least we're able to comprehend the true story of what's going on.
Yes, we are aware that the actual reason for these things might not be the reason we're being told. It might have something to do with, oh, say, MK Ultra or pharmaceuticals or both.
It's possible.
Yeah.
So,
Well, Lady Gaga is not going to be showing any real emotion, of course.
well, she got all teary, but it was totally fake. Anyway,
Yeah,
she was.
someone must have been chopping onions nearby.
So this was definitely, another false flag in Orlando, as far as I'm concerned. Interestingly enough, during the same time that this was going on, there was an attack in California as well. In the weather war, we were hit really, really hard by chemtrail spraying, and this happened right after we got back from contact in the desert. So just last week, it was
Mm-hmm.
it was unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
It was insane. They were going crazy.
Yes, and we were both in recovery mode, so it was very difficult to do the normal, usual work that we do in a situation like this because we were kind of decompressing from this.
And I
from
was
this
sick
trip.
from the heat and from the virus I got.
That
And
too.
it took a couple days of MMS to get over that. But
Mm-hmm.
that's amazing, because if I went to a doctor and got antibiotics, it could have been a week or two before I was better.
Mm-hmm.
So while recovering, we were going through this crazy energetic attack. And the way that we see what's going on in the world is we look at it through the sky. The sky is a reflection of what's going on with us. So sometimes you'll see crazy chemtrail days, and those actually do coincide with other things. Like in this case, it happened at the same time as the false flag attack.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this general assault on humanity all at once, and it happens in different ways in different places. Interestingly enough, when Lady Gaga was tearfully reading the list of the victims, she said, "This is an attack on humanity." I thought that was really interesting.
Because it's true.
Yes.
But not in the way that it's being fed to us
Well,
in a
right.
mainstream sense.
It was interesting because she was totally correct about that. Although we're told that it's terrorists doing this, and we're told that this is a problem because we have guns, because we have a Second Amendment that allows us to defend ourselves.
Yes. And then of course they quote unquote go through the person's computer after the attack and they find out that they have all this literature about freedom and free speech and gun rights and it's just more of that false polarization that's going on, and it's the same formula every time. It's completely formulaic, cookie cutter style stuff that they're doing with these false flag attacks. And yeah, this is just the latest one, and there will be others, but like you said, that's why we're on the human frequency here, to tell people that hey, there's the dominant narrative and there's the truth, and the two are usually at the exact opposite end of the spectrum.
So during this crazy week, we were working on flipping the energy, which is what we do. So the chemtrails, again, they were a wake-up call to me.
Mm-hmm.
And the chemtrails are how I gauge what's going on in the world. It's so much more than just an isolated attack. The chemtrails are completely related with everything else.
They are. But the sky is a very good indication of what's going on. And yeah, it's more than just that, though.
Right. So I read the weather. Okay, I'm the weather girl of the independent media. And I have a blog all about weather, thekembo.tumblr.com. But what we do with the weather is we look at it in terms of weather warfare. So we see the elite wage an attack.
I don't like to call them that.
I know, I say that loosely. But let's call them the parasites.
They're not elite. They're not illuminated. They're quite the opposite.
Okay.
They're just a bunch of lowly intestinal roundworms.
So let's call it like we sees it. Okay, the parasites
Yes.
will wage an attack, and it'll come in the form of false flag attacks. It'll come in the form of these insidious attacks, these poisonings.
Frequencies. Huge.
So when we look at the sky, we're actually reading not just the weather, but we're reading the consciousness of Earth on that day. That's where it got really interesting, is when we got past just the chemtrails and realized the energetic phenomena involved. So we're getting attacked, and we're too sick to deal with it because contact in the desert completely wiped us out. And a lot of it is coming from our own mental state. Once we recovered, the first thing we did was rebuild our quartz medicine wheels. We have white quartz medicine wheels around the property. Actually, there's a lot of white quartz just in the land here on this mountain, and we brought a lot of it from the beaches of Catalina Island. If you go to Catalina Island, you can go to the beach and just load a suitcase full of white
Oh, there's
quartz and just haul it back with you.
tons of
And
it.
beautiful too, because it's worn down by the water. So you get beautiful round white stones. So we built some medicine wheels up here.
Yeah,
and
we have
phi wheels.
6 of them out kind of strewn about, but we placed those about, I don't know, 4 months ago
when we moved
so.
here.
Yeah.
So,
and they've fallen apart since then. I mean, some of them were still intact, but they needed some work, basically.
Medicine wheels need maintenance. We build them in other places too. We put a couple on Catalina Island when we were there, and who knows what they look like today. You just got to keep building them. And what they do is they balance the energy of the earth and the sky. So you're working with the energetic lines of the earth, ley lines. You're also working with the atmosphere. And the medicine wheels do similar thing to what orgonite does. It actually produces orgone energy. It's very balancing. You can also clean the atmosphere with them. It sounds strange, but it works. We've seen it in action. And we've also heard about other people doing this and read about accounts like Blue Thunder up in Lake Big Bear, who built the medicine wheels and did the ceremonies and brought snow and rain again during a terrible drought, which was engineered. It's the same drought we've been in.
Mm-hmm.
So we rebuilt them, and it was really beautiful. It actually calmed down the energy. There was some kind of crazy energy, even here in the mountains during these attacks. People go a little nuts.
Especially in the summer.
And when they're being sprayed with chemtrails and bombarded with frequencies, they will act nuts. So there was all this yelling and noise, just like in LA, because we live near a park, and we could hear it, and everybody was kind of freaking out. And after building the medicine wheels again, it did calm down. The skies were beautiful and cloudy, and you could see it on my blog. We helped clean up the energy with those wheels.
Yeah, it was a noticeable decrease in the maniacal screaming department.
Yep, absolutely.
that was the most noticeable aspect of it. But,
yeah, it's been really clear since, too. It's been really nice.
Oh, yeah.
But this
days and days of just pristine blue skies. Today, specifically, you mentioned when we started the show, it was very high energy, good, crisp sky. The mountains look clear. Like when I remember Wilhelm Reich said that when the mountains in the distance have a bluish or purplish hue to them, that is an indication of high orgone or OR energy. And that's what we seek to do with our work, is to have more of those days and less of the days where everyone's being bombarded and they're sick and going crazy out of their minds.
Yeah, literally on the heavy spray days we had recently, by the end of the day, we did clean it. And you could see this time-lapse photography on my site, on the blog, the Tumblr blog, thecambo.tumblr.com. We did clean it up, but it was very difficult. And the energy was, you could feel it. It didn't feel healthy. The animals were not out. Everything kind of had a drab look to it. But when it got cleaned up, especially the last couple of days was really clean, everything looked brighter and crisper. I mean, even the foliage, and there were more animals around. You feel a difference in energy.
Definitely feel a difference. And that's the best way that people can measure what's going on. Everyone asks us, how do you measure what the orgonite does? You just have to look.
Yeah.
You just have to observe your environment around you. Observe it on a day when it's really bad, and then just sort of A and B that with a day when it's really good. And, I love to say nature doesn't lie. So, when it's bad, you'll know it. And when it's good, you'll see the birds out. You'll see the crispness of the sky. You'll feel the energy of the air, because as we kind of hammer this point into the ground on our show, but the atmosphere is electric, and so are we. And again, it's a reflection of what's going on in us, what we see in the sky above us every day.
It's all the same. The healthier we are, the healthier our sky is. It literally is connected. And we've been really working hard to keep our energy fields high and clear. The tensor rings are still working.
Oh, yeah.
I've been enjoying those ever since contact. The most amazing thing about the tensor ring, so this is slim spurling technology, and I've looked more into this. The ring is made of copper. It's like a copper wire folded in half. So it's like two wound together. And then it's it's welded together at the end. So it's a continuous spiral of copper, and it creates a tensor field. So there's an energy field in the middle of the ring that's very healthy and beneficial. It's like orgone energy. It's very, very similar, but it's tuned to specific frequencies called qubits. And the one that I have is it's 333 megahertz, and it's supposed to help with sound. It's supposed to help restructure sound. Still, 1 week later, I have a great report on this ring. I don't hear the digital data transfer sound in my ear anymore. I know a few other people, I've met a few people who can hear wireless, and it's not fun to live with this because there's wireless technology everywhere, smart meters and cell phone towers and the stuff in people's houses, the Wi-Fi,
et cetera, et cetera.
I hear it. So for me, it's very distracting, to say the least, and maddening, in fact. So I'm hearing the sound of, it's not just ringing in the ears, it's 2 tones back and forth at irregular intervals, and I've likened it to a fax machine. The tensor ring has totally reduced it. I rarely hear it. I've heard it a couple times for a very short period of time during the last week, even while wearing the ring, but that's very rare.
And then you sort of just make an adjustment.
I adjust the ring.
It usually goes away.
I'll change arms, or sometimes I'll hang it over my ear, but changing arms is actually the best way. Somehow renews it. And I wish I understood more about tensor technology, but that's part of the learning journey.
It is. And it would be nice if obviously we can't get Slim on the show. He died back in 2007, but he has a lot of very good information online. Is it Light Life technology?
Tools.
Light Life tools.
It's really, really great stuff. I highly recommend it. And I really couldn't even understand it till I tried it myself. The same as orgone. With these energies, you just can't talk about it. You just got to do it.
And I notice it too, because I have 2 little rings that are, I don't know, probably less than an inch in diameter. And they both go over my finger when I sleep. And I definitely I'm asking you, Sharon, because you're the one that has the burden of sleeping next to me.
Yeah, I'm the one that kicks you when you make noise. But you haven't been breathing heavily. You've been breathing calmly and normally, and it's made a big difference. And I've been sleeping through the night, except when I have to use the bathroom. But I drink way too much water. That's the issue there. But other than that, the sleep has been.
Well, I don't know if that's an issue. That's good for you.
Right. It is. And I'm kind of a water addict.
Especially when it's not loaded with lead and fluoride and arsenic and chloramine. All the wonderful things they put in the water.
That's why you got to distill the water.
Yeah.
So going to sleep, needless to say, is a big routine for us because we're strapping the zappers onto our feet because the zapper is a device that kills parasites, and we often sleep with them. You got to keep it on your foot or the palm of your hand, which are the only parts of your body that are strong enough to withstand the electricity all night long. So
for long periods of time, more than say 20 or 30 minutes.
Right. So we put the zappers on our feet to kill parasites. We've got the orgonite all around us. Now we put on the tensor rings, and then we close up the EMF canopy. So it's a big procedure staying energetically clear.
It's like a castle, they got the drawbridge, they got the portcullis, they got all these layers, layer upon layer of security.
Absolutely. Well, something very interesting I saw this week was Camille Paglia.
Oh, yeah.
Talking about transgender mania. And I definitely wanted to talk about this because I remember first hearing about Camille Paglia back in high school or college. She's very well respected in academia. She maybe drinks a few too many venti lattes, but she's passionate.
She is, and she's well respected in those academic circles and liberal circles, very mainstream. Yeah.
She writes for salon.com. That's about as liberal and mainstream as it gets. And anyway, she's a feminist, she's a lesbian. And she is one badass lady. I've got to tell you, she's really transcended boundaries because I have very super liberal friends who I'm kind of not such good friends with anymore because our philosophies have deviated. But she's very well respected by my liberal friends.
And she's saying stuff that a lot of people I have deduced are too afraid to say, or it risks alienation in their social circles or some other deterrent along those lines. But she said it, And it
She
was a
said
pretty
it.
interesting interview.
She said, well, I looked at a lot of her interviews because I was really amazed by what she had to say. She's talking about transgender mania. She says that transgender mania is signaling the end of our civilization. She's talking about the decline of our civilization. And I'm not anti-gay at all. I believe in freedom and rights for everyone. But there's definitely been a strange agenda in the mainstream media to promote transgender, the changing of sex, the blurring of the lines, right?
Yes, and just the idea of sowing the seeds of confusion and making people just, yeah, like you said, just making things hazy and kind of making it so that people have a very unclear idea of who they are, what they really stand for, what defines them as living human beings. And yeah, I think she makes that clear too, that she's obviously
She's a lesbian
not
and she's a
anti-gay.
feminist. She's a feminist, by the way.
Right.
So
She's obviously not against this stuff, but I think she points out the degree to which it is being peddled by
yes,
the mainstream narrative is just there's A, something wrong with it, and B, she explained, how it is, how it's happened in history.
right. She
That
pointed to the time of Oscar Wilde as being
Mhm.
a degenerate period of time.
Yeah,
So Oscar Wilde lived from 1854 to 1900. She thinks that's a very interesting time. She loves Oscar Wilde. It's very interesting. In fact, she looks at everything as kind of like as sociology and psychology. Like she watches the Real Housewives shows and she
Yeah.
looks at them as anthropological studies. So this
Right.
to me is interesting too. Anyway, she talked a lot about the biology and how just because someone feels like they're not male or female, if they change sex through surgery, they're still actually biologically the original sex.
Because the DNA is programmed to what they originally are. The cells in their body are programmed to be, of that ilk as well. So what she's saying is that you can have stuff augmented medically, but ultimately you're still whatever you were
Right.
were born as.
Right. And the mainstream media does definitely want to blur the lines. And this is part of breaking up the family. And this is what my liberal friends would say, that I'm a conservative, crazy fanatic for saying this.
Mm-hmm.
But it is actually breaking up the family. Homosexuality is not breaking up the family. It's this blurring of the lines and the confusing of the youth that's breaking up the
The
family.
agenda
And
that's being promoted is what's breaking it
well,
up.
after all, as Ken Rolla said, the reptilians don't raise their own children. So if they're trying to run the show from behind the scenes, they're definitely not going to understand our need for family and the natural male and female roles. So Camille Paglia said that there are biological differences between men and women, and it's important that we understand this, and that the transgender movement and this big push from the mainstream to blur the lines does not take into account the science. They are actually science deniers and denying the biology
You're right.
of
And
male and female roles.
I recall her I recall her sort of lambasting feminism for being sort of immersed in that state of denial, that
Exactly.
very state of denial, trying to make everything homogenized, make everything the same. And that's not natural. And then, like you said, there's no scientific basis for that. And it is literally anti-science.
It was very nice to hear her say it, because it's something that I believe too, is that women can do anything they want to do, obviously. But feminism seeks to turn women into men and denies what the women really want for themselves. So what Camille Paglia said is, when a woman reaches puberty, she already knows who she is. She doesn't have to prove herself. Women know who they are, but men are looking outside of themselves and want to prove themselves. She's not saying anything bad about men or women, because you could look at it either way. You could say, oh yeah, women aren't trying to achieve anything. Or you could say, men are violent, but she's not saying that. She's saying that women are biologically knowing who they are. They want to have families, and a lot of women want to be mothers. A lot of women don't want to go into the workforce or be forced into college. Why not? Why not be a mother if that's what you want to be? That doesn't make you less of a person, and that's what she's saying.
Yeah.
And
And why would feminism not be embracing what is natural of a woman, and just trying to, like I said, just make everything completely homogenized, make everyone the same.
It's been co-opted like everything else, like the green movement. It's been completely subverted.
Yep.
And likewise, she was talking about men. Men need to accomplish things outside of themselves. She said the best achievements in the world are done by men. See, she's just telling it like it is, and she's being honest, and she's not putting anyone down, because this is all external 3D stuff anyway.
And
So,
I love the fact that she's already in these so-called well-respected circles, right? Because, you know, someone like us would say something and we'd just be dismissed by these people, but because she's so firmly ensconced, right, that she can speak her mind about this, and it can't just be brushed aside and dismissed as casually and cavalierly as with someone else who's just new to it.
Well, she doesn't talk about parasitic shape-shifting reptilian humanoids.
And that's a problem.
She does need to recognize that, but I don't expect her to. And here's what's good about that. She remains respected in academia and is able to point out this insanity of this transgender movement pushed by the parasitic elite to blur the lines between males and females and confuse us. She may not know about the parasites, the reptilians, or any of them.
That may come in due time.
She'll probably flip out when she finds out about that.
Oh yeah, there'll be even more venti lattes at that point.
Well, yeah, and anyway, she is pretty passionate. But I like that.
Yeah, she sounds a little like an auctioneer, like she's talking very fast. There's not a nanosecond of silence when this woman speaks.
She has a lot to say.
Yeah.
I really did appreciate that. Well, that kind of leads me into the music issues too. Oh, and yeah. Because she did talk about stuff that connects with the music industry.
Yeah.
Like, for example, these MK Ultra videos and Miley Cyrus with her giant dildo. It all kind of connects back to that. In the music industry, there's a lot of blurring of the lines and a lot of confusion.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the place of technology in music?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And, you know, my musical background has been one where I kind of I kind of shied away from technological stuff in my music. You know, when I started playing keyboards, I pretty much stuck with vintage keyboards, and I didn't really go into the whole synthesizer realm. I kind of avoided it for a very long time, until I met you, of course, and I started getting into a lot of that 80s stuff.
You made a lot of fun of my music. You made fun of my music at first. Well, and I made fun of yours.
Yeah, well, you know, someone who's listening to 60s and 70s European soundtracks, and suddenly they start listening to, you know, Devo and Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark and and stuff, and Oingo Boingo and stuff like that. There's an adjustment period,
right?
But you know, good music is good music, and I've obviously warmed up to that in the past. But you know, for years though, I was playing only vintage keyboards. I was playing a Fender Rhodes electric piano, a Wurlitzer, a Hohner clavinet. I had and still have a vintage Hammond B3 organ with the Leslie cabinet. So I still love my vintage keyboards, but I didn't go off into Moog synthesizers and the ARP Odyssey and
Moog.
all that.
That's so pretentious.
Well, I don't want to say Moog, and then I get a bunch of emails from all these keyboard enthusiasts saying, you said it wrong.
Oh, they're so pretentious.
Yes, they are. But
listen to too much yes.
And God bless them.
Right. Well, I finally come around to your cha-cha music and Italian soundtracks.
Oh, yeah.
So,
you better.
Well, it's good stuff. I recognize it now. But yeah, we've been listening to a lot of electronic music lately, but not techno music.
No.
Vintage, ambient.
As far as technology's place, that was what you asked me. What is technology's place in music? And we have been listening to a lot of Steve Roach lately and Robert Rich, and we're very much into the ambient, or he mentioned Moog, and now I should say ambient.
Ambient.
whatever it's called, you know what I'm talking about. But we've been listening to a lot of that stuff, and that music is channeled from the ether as opposed to being channeled from the ego, which a lot of the stuff today is. You have your Lady Gaga and your Adele and your Katy Perry and your Justin Bieber, and they're all one and the same. To me, there is absolutely no difference between any of these mind-controlled MK Ultra slaves who are just doing the bidding of the equally mind controlled people who got them into this industry in the first place. You know, you don't, people who are talented and have something to say, usually something subversive, they don't get into this industry because those who seek to destroy music as an art form know that if those people get into positions of prominence, that the whole house of cards will just collapse. So there is definitely an effort to keep original thinking and etheric channeling out of music and to keep it just a purely three-dimensional, self-indulgent, self-serving, ego-driven level. And that's a huge problem in the so-called music industry. And I know you've seen a lot of this too, right?
Well, that's why I couldn't have a music career. The music at the beginning of the show, by the way, is my music, and the music at the end of the hour is Gabe's music. We both spend a lot of time playing music, but when you're channeling music and you're doing it with this kind of intention of raising consciousness, you're not going to have a career. And I remember for years this frustrated me. I moved to Portland, Oregon in 2001 because it seemed like the middle of nowhere. It's somewhere I could live cheap and be a musician. I had no idea that Portland, Oregon was a place people moved because it was cool for music. I thought I was moving to the middle of nowhere. Turns out I moved to a place where every single person I met was a musician. So that didn't work out like I thought because it didn't matter whether you had talent or not. Everyone thought it was the coolest thing in the world to be a rock star. So it became even worse than it was before I left to get a gig.
And it was a very communist city, from what you tell me. Just not necessarily politically, but
oh yeah, politically too.
Well, maybe, but we're on the topic of music here.
Oh, but you got me on the topic of Portland, and now it's gonna go off.
And everything else is under the umbrella. No pun intended, because it's always raining.
Nobody uses an umbrella there, though. They walk in the rain with their coffee and their walking sandals and socks and their parkas.
I think I'm going to be sick.
Well, I was sick for 8 years in Portland.
My condolences.
The music scene there was pretty much like whoever could suck up the most to the newspaper, the Willamette Week or the Portland Mercury, they would get the gigs. And I realized, oh, it's not about sucking up. It's about paying for advertising. Whoever's paying for advertising is going to get the write-ups, and then they'll get the gigs. And it was just this huge game of press and media and a whole bunch of BS that had nothing to do with music. So for somebody who just spent their time in the basement all day, every day, writing music and channeling as much beauty as I could out of the atmosphere and getting better at it over time. You know, the early stuff was pretty experimental and weird sounding, but you get better over time. It didn't matter. Mm-hmm. So my music partner and I, who was my life partner at the time, we thought, well, okay, let's make it more accessible. We'll do the same thing, but instead of going off on weird, jam sessions for long periods of time and strange electronic noises, let's make a song out of it. So we did. We made songs out of it, and it sounded good. I have to say, we got good reception from people, but getting gigs, that was another story. They said, oh, give them your demo. They'll give you a gig. You guys are good. That didn't matter. So we learned it, but I didn't understand why. It took a long time to understand that it was all about money. It was all about advertising, that bands on indie labels were just the controlled opposition off of the major labels to make us think we had a choice of something different, but it was just as mindless and mind-numbing, and the lyrics were just as vacant, all about partying and drinking and boys and girls, just like the mainstream music. I started to see the darkness. I started to see there was something not pure in the music. It made itself very clear to me over the years living there and seeing really talented musicians just struggling, and talentless hacks who now, some of them have made it into the mainstream. like the Gossip. They were a band back then. There's nothing to it. And now I'm seeing that they made it. I mean, this is a few years ago now, but even Vigilant Citizen commented on the girl from that band whose name I can't remember, but the lead singer. MK Ultra symbolism, mind one eye symbolism, and that
Oh,
kind
the
of stuff.
hand over the
Yeah,
eye. Oh, God.
and I didn't realize that this was just at the time. It took me a long time to realize this because I was sending out demos to the labels, like, why can't we get signed? We're actually way better than these bands. They're looking for people that they can mind control. They're looking for people to push
and
the
that will
agenda.
put, yeah, exactly.
No.
That will put out the message that they want to be put out. And if you do that at first and you have a crisis of conscience about it, suddenly you're no longer relevant. You're no longer in that industry. You're not there anymore on that echelon.
Yeah.
And it's also rigorously monitored to prevent the, as I said, etheric channeling rather than ego channeling, which is what they want.
Yeah. So in 2007, finally, we went into a studio. We had been recording ourselves. We met a really cool guy there who had been in a band called the Miracle Workers, very cool garage band from Portland in the 80s. And he was very supportive of us. And he said, let's get you guys in a studio. Of course, we had to pay for this studio because we weren't signed. But we thought, let's give it a try. A lot of people like our music. So we tried it out. And the experience was actually really positive. Cost a fortune. Wasn't worth it.
Uh-huh.
And while sitting in the studio, I remember looking at the music magazines they have there. You've seen these magazines they got in the studios, these Mojo and all these.
These Rolling Stone. It's just a joke.
And so I'm flipping through the magazines. I'm looking at Amy Winehouse was still alive at the time. And I thought, why is Amy Winehouse popular? Like, what is the big deal here? And then just flipping through and seeing the different indie bands that got all the write-ups in every town, and they got all the gigs in the indie venues in every town while I was trying to book tours. Like, how do you get an opening spot for one of these bands? Mm-hmm. You can't. Anyway, so I'm flipping through the magazines and my self-esteem is just crashing into the ground because I think, what's wrong here?
Well, once you understand how the MK Ultra system works, this all begins to make so much more sense. And you can literally see that it explains everything. And the music industry is that is just the most quintessential example of just that widespread domination and control of what's being promoted versus what is being just completely swept aside. And it's very, the layer of armor is very thick, to put it mildly.
Well, after years of this, I finally figured out what was going on, and I don't look back at it with regret anymore. I don't mind. I'm actually happy I didn't have a music career.
Me too.
You are too?
I actually am, and when I stopped being in a actual band in 2009. So for a couple of years, I was just kind of doing my own thing, and I did a couple one-off things here and there, but nothing terribly serious. And this was around the time that I started to, get into this stuff with you, Sharon, about figuring out what's really going on in these mainstream industries, and the MK Ultra mind control, of course, was a huge piece of the puzzle. So my attitude on being in a band and living that lifestyle and playing that type of music, it just completely changed, because it's just so self-indulgent and so pointless. We're at a very crucial point in history here, and there's, sides are being chosen, and there's a lot of things that have to be done, and taking time to just screw around is, there's nothing wrong with that, but when it just, you can't let it define you. You can't let it define who you are. If you're doing that sort of lifestyle around the clock every day, it's completely pointless.
It's exhausting too.
Mm-hmm.
Your friends who are still touring around, you remember what it was like touring. It's just exhausting. It's demoralizing. It's depressing.
It's very interesting that I gave up in my 20s, and now that I'm in my 30s, I just now I can relax. I'm not like these people who are I don't want to mention any names specifically, but
Well, I followed
people I know who are at least 10, if not 20 or so years older than me, and just completely immersed in that lifestyle, and it's just such a.
They still think it's cool.
Yeah, they still think it's you. You took the words right out of my mouth. They still think it's cool, and it's just. Come on, there's like. There's so much other stuff to be doing now that's important, and why don't we do that first, and then we can like take the time to just gallivant around on stage and gesticulate wildly and drink and party and do whatever it is you have to do. And
I think those days are done. I think when the paradigm shifts, there's not going to be any more gallivanting around. I'm happy to say that I followed in the footsteps of Henry Rollins, had my rock and roll career till my late 30s, and then said, okay, I'm going to be a radio host now.
And also, that's not what music is about, gallivanting around on stage.
No, it's not.
Gesticulating wildly. That's not at all what it's about. It's a communal experience about sharing with other people, and this sort of this glorification of putting arbitrary people up on stage and dressing them a certain way, and just having it be, again, just it goes back to the ego once more. Just this glorified ego fest. Just this disgusting, self-indulgent, just worship me, love me.
Well, it's so 3D. It's so not what.
It's like that Stone Roses song, "I Want to Be Adored."
I love that song.
It is a great song. And then he's saying, I want to be adored, and then the very last time he says, I gotta be adored.
Well, yeah,
so
they gotta.
It's a desperation thing, and yeah, I do not identify with that mentality at all anymore.
I used to. And that's actually one of the psychosis of the musician. I mean, for me, I needed that attention. I needed that validation. And I put too much of my identity in being a musician. And now I don't really have that kind of issue anymore. I actually don't put my identity in anything anymore. In fact, a living woman doesn't have an identity. I can't be tracked. I can't be identified.
Neither can a living man.
I just walk around all the time. But I want to get back to the technology music.
Yeah. We went on a long tangent there, but
yeah. Well, that's what Portland will do. I could do a Portland episode if you'd like to know.
And you still wouldn't cover it all, would you?
We could do a whole show about Portland if you'd like, but
I'll take a rain check on that. Again, no pun intended.
Well, technology and music. I love synthesizers. When I was doing this music that we were just talking about in Portland, I used a lot of synthesizers. It was an organic and electronic mix. So I programmed a drum machine, but we played live instruments with it, guitar and bass, and I did some keyboards. There was some programmed stuff. I was really into the production. I produced everything, and including live shows. I'd mix everything, and it was really exciting, and it was fun for me. I used the electronic instruments, but it wasn't a transhumanist thing at all. And so that's what I'm noticing in music is the transhumanism versus the organic. A lot of the modern top 40 music is transhumanist. I'd say most of it is.
Yeah.
And I hear it, it's disturbing.
And that's intentional, of course.
It's totally disturbing sounding, but we were talking about Steve Roach and Robert Rich. Mm-hmm. So they're using the same kind of electronic instruments, but it's very beautiful sound. It sounds like other places. I hear the desert. I hear the jungle.
And you can tell that's the biggest thing about that type of music is that you can tell where it's from. They don't need to state that it's being channeled. It just is. It just is. And I can't explain it any better than that.
I know. I wish I could teach it because there are a lot of people that fall for the fakers, like new age music that's completely phony. I've heard some new age music. I don't even know who the artist was, but it was totally phony baloney. It was these really basic chord changes. It was this kind of silly, girly singing. And these were not love songs to God. This was just total phony baloney new age music. And I'm talking about, I wish I could explain it, but it's something like, I don't know. How do you educate someone on knowing the difference? How do you teach that discernment?
It's not really something that you can teach. It's just something that you sense. And It's very difficult because there's so much music out there, and you get into these gray areas sometimes where you can tell that something is not right with a certain style of music, but you can't quite put your finger on
Yeah.
it.
It's ego. I think it's ego. I think it's that you can detect it
Mm-hmm.
and you sense it. So I can't really teach you how to see that. That's something that you figure out over time.
Mm-hmm. But as far as technology is concerned with this music, is there is a right and a wrong way, just like with anything else. There is a right and a wrong way to apply that technology to music. And when you misuse it, when you use it for transhumanism and auto tuning and things that clearly has no business in true bona fide music, you are just missing the point. And, you know, it's really a question of, are you using the technology or is the technology using you?
Oh, absolutely. We talk about this in life too. Just going back to the early pioneers of electronic music. And lately, we've been listening to a lot of Gary Newman, who I love. And
Newman.
More Seinfeld references.
Yep. Gotta have at least one in every episode.
Right. Well, going back to the early electronic music pioneers, what I love about it is it's futuristic and it's from the past at the same time. And it's amazing to me that that is able to be conveyed through music. When I listen to Gary Newman, I especially hear, because his music from the 70s, late 70s, and he was clearly abducted by aliens. It's like completely obvious to me that there was something going on there. In fact, recently I started thinking he might be a hybrid. Now that I know more about the hybrids that Laurie McDonald talked about.
Yeah, look at those eyes. I mean,
He's very unusual.
Something's going on there.
You listen to his lyrics and he's talking about horrific acts committed by aliens, and he sings, "I'm praying to the aliens." These anyway.
Mm-hmm. We're independent from someone.
Well, he says, "And what if God's dead? We must have done something wrong. The dark facade ends. We're independent from someone." There's so much in those lyrics.
Yeah.
Anyway, I actually talked a lot about this on my old radio show on the Activation Hour because I've been obsessed with Newman for a long time.
Yes.
Anyway, what I hear in that music, he's using a lot of technology, but it's vintage technology. It's vintage synth.
It's late 70s synthesizers.
I hear other planets. The music is from another planet. So it sounds like it's from the past and the future at the same time because the technology on that other planet was far ahead of ours. So this music was made in the past, but it sounds futuristic to our ears.
Because we're on a different timeline than they are.
Exactly.
Which goes with what I was saying in our last episode, where a human lifespan could be perceived as immortal next to an insect with a lifespan of only a couple weeks. Conversely, a human lifespan is like the blink of an eye compared to
the Anunnaki.
Yes, who are apparently living 3,600 Earth years is their single year. So
we've been exploding out of control in population. No wonder they want to depopulate us. Because if it's been...
And they're moving as fast as they can, but it's taking years.
That's why they chemtrail. That's why they poison the water. It's like they want it to go faster. They can't. And I say, why don't they just nuke us already?
Well, I don't think... Maybe they can't do that.
I don't know how they can't do that. Part of this is also... they're enjoying our suffering.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be the Anunnaki. It might be the Greys, the reptilians.
The Mantis people.
Yeah, now I know about the Mantis people. Thanks to Laurie McDonald, I've been, acquainted with many, many peoples. No, not firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
My firsthand experience is all etheric. I haven't actually met them like Ken Rolla, thank goodness. I'd probably freak out like he did.
Well, going back to technology, there's this preposterous and erroneous idea that technology and humans need to be integrated with each other, and that is by definition transhumanism, and that's obviously not the case. We've seen quite clearly, quite plainly, that only bad things can come out of that type of merging.
Absolutely. What we need to do is integrate the technology in our lives. So we're not integrating with the technology in our bodies. We're using it in our lives.
We're using it not vice versa.
Yeah, that was a great talk I heard from Siddiqui Bakari. Is your technology pimping you? Because we are letting it control us. So how do we use an iPhone? I finally had to give in and get an iPhone. I use it when I travel, and I have one app.
Yeah,
Square.
In case anyone is wondering, how could you be using an iPhone? No, we use it for one thing and one thing only. When it is not in use, swiping cards for sales, it is off, and it's wrapped in aluminum foil because it's still sending and receiving even when it's off.
Well, we will be activating this phone for $3 a month for 30 minutes of talk and text. So $3 a month, okay?
Very basic.
And paying for data by the day. So that's using...
And we don't need it for anything else.
Right. So
where we live, we have a landline. We don't need a cell phone. We don't need that mind control mechanism, which is exactly what it is, zapping us with toxic radiation, death energy 24/7. We don't need that. It doesn't help us in any way. It only harms us. And that's why we do not have this phone unless we absolutely need it. That's why we do not have a Wi-Fi router. We plug directly in with an Ethernet cable. We don't have a smart meter anymore. We drink distilled water. We don't eat GMO food. The list goes on and on and on
Right.
and on.
That's an example of us using the technology. I acknowledge there's a use for cell phones. It's sparing, but it's useful. That's using the technology that's available to us. And in some ways, technology connects us. Now we have the ability to do radio shows on the internet as opposed to being, tied to just testicular radio. Okay. So we have more options.
Don't you mean terrestrial radio?
Yes, but as a big Howard Stern fan, I have to pay homage. So we definitely need to be using the technology. It's very useful, but we can't let it use us. So I tell people, if you can, learn to read a map. Don't use the GPS. They're just tracking you everywhere you go. They're going to send you the wrong way if you're trying to get to us with GPS anyway. Over and over again, this happens. So definitely, you gotta know technology's place in your life.
Yes, and you have to use it where it's appropriate. And I have a good friend who says, just because you can use a piece of technology doesn't mean you should. So it's all about finding what for you is that level of where it's right. And you don't overdo it, you don't underdo it. You find its place in your life and you go with that.
Well, if we could use technology responsibly, it can actually be part of our ascension process. And I say this because I've been lugging around a record collection from house to house for years, and I've had to get rid of hundreds of my records.
Me too.
And small storage, MP3s, having stuff in your computer, it lightens your life. So if you're trying to shed possessions, I could see technology being very helpful in that regard.
Well, fortunately, most of the records I got rid of were the subpar hippie music that I inherited from my dad. So
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
No more Joy of Cooking. Oh no.
And Brinsley Schwartz.
That one I can't even wrap my head around.
Just don't worry about it.
All right. Well, we're coming up to the end of hour 1. We've got a great guest coming up in hour 2, Paul Reimers, and we have an event coming up on Saturday. This coming Saturday at 7 p.m. at Longevity Pure Medicine in Los Angeles. We'll be doing a talk with Dean Ryan. I'll be doing a talk, and Gabe will be there too. And Dean will be there.
I'll be there, and our iPhone will be there.
Yeah, our iPhone will be there. If you don't have any cash and you would like to buy Organite and support our work.
If you want to say hi to our iPhone, it will be there.
It will be there with us. Dean Ryan's going to be doing an excellent talk as well. He's going to talk about the vaccine agenda, how to protect yourself and your family. He's going to be talking about HARP technology in the ocean and sea life. So this will tie in very well with what I'll be talking about, orgone energy. So we're very excited about this event. You could find out more about this on my website, thechembo.com. It's the top link under upcoming events. That's thechembow.com.
Please come and join us in hour 2 with our guest, Paul Reimers. Thank you. You've been listening to The Human Frequency on American Freedom Radio.
No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, no fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio, American Freedom Radio.
Welcome back to the Human Frequency on American Freedom Radio. We are joined here in hour 2 by our guest, Paul Reimers. Now, Paul is a certified master practitioner in neurolinguistic programming, and he offers coaching sessions both in person and online. He's trained personally with Drunvalo Melchizedek and was certified by him to teach his 4-day workshop called Awakening the Illuminated Heart. Now, Paul has created a number of original classes and workshops in the fields of subtle energy, subtle perception, and consciousness expansion, which he teaches in the Los Angeles area and beyond. Paul, welcome to the Human Frequency, and thanks for joining us this evening.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me on the show, Gabe. And you did an amazing job pronouncing Drimbleau's name. It's kind of a big mix of words. You know, it's another one of my favorite authors he wrote the book Flow, and his name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, but literally it's like this big long mix of letters. It's basically like what you see before you lose at Scrabble. Like it's this insane. It shouldn't even be a word. It shouldn't be a word, but it's his name, you know. And Drimbleau is the same thing. So anyone who, you know, like pronounces it that well, like I thank you so much for for doing that. It's not easy.
Yeah, I usually, when I lose at Scrabble, I just see a Welsh word that has it's all consonants and absolutely no vowels.
Sometimes Polish words too.
Polish,
yeah.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is Polish. I only know how to pronounce his name because I got one of his things on audiobook. I was like, oh, that's how you pronounce his name, you know? Yeah.
Well, I wanted to start this off with there's a term, and it's neurolinguistic programming, and I have a very interesting connection with that term because since Sharon and I have been doing our work with orgone energy these past couple of years, I've really been researching heavily the use of neurolinguistic programming by the disinformants in the mainstream media who are using this programming to convince people of things that are obviously not the truth. So that is that is sort of my handle on that term. But I wanted to ask you about it specifically because that's that keyword for me, and obviously you use that in a productive and constructive way, whereas they are using it in insidious Machiavellian way. So
exactly. Well, it's interesting because it's, you know, if you learn a little bit about, you know, how we represent things to ourselves and what that, you know, what those representations, you know, create a feeling for us or a certain way of being or certain energy of like attraction or aversion for things, it can be a really powerful thing to, you know, use either for good or, you know, for harm, unfortunately. But it came about through John Grinder and Richard Bandler. It's like John Grinder was a linguist and Richard Bandler was a student, and he was coming from a computer programming background, so he had one half of it and Grinder had the other half of it, and they kind of came together and were able to find these patterns that really great therapists were able to use, and they were able to duplicate the results. And when they did that, like Milton Erickson, who was a hypnotherapist, Virginia Satir, who's a family therapist, and all of these different people, they could really break down what in essence they were doing when they were doing it right, and, you know, be able to transfer those results to their clients. And my favorite, I'll just, you know, give this really brief story that I think is my favorite illustration of what NLP does. It's so pragmatic and useful. Is like, you know, just a nuts and bolts approach to things. The Bandler and Grinder, when they first started out, there was a woman who saw them, and she was schizophrenic, and she basically, her specific consciousness, she had no idea what she dreamt or imagined, whether that was just imagined or something that actually she experienced. So if she just imagined or dreamt that she yelled at somebody, she would just think, wow, do I need to call that person and apologize? Or is that a real thing that I did? Or is that just an imagination? And they said that for 30 years, there was psychologists analyzing her, you know, her condition and really just studying pathology, just taking notes on all of the things that that were not really working with her mind or with her consciousness. And they said like 2 or 3 filing cabinets full of paperwork just on her, but she was absolutely no better off than she was before. And she went in to see Vander Grindler, Grinder and Grinder and Bandler, to see if they could help her at all. And they basically listened to her situation. And they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to work with you so you can start intentionally dreaming and imagining in black and white. And they did that, and they helped her practice. They helped her train to do that. And pretty soon, even at night, she got to the point where she was dreaming in black and white, thinking and imagining in black and white. And that way, whenever she would have that feeling of, did I really hurt that person, or is it something I imagined or whatever, she just could look and see, is it in color black and white. So for me, I know that there's all these books about advertising and ways that they use things like that to manipulate people, and the governments and all of those things, and that's all definitely out there. But I just really love when people come up with like really powerful, elegant solutions that could really help people transform at a deep level. So that's just sort of my
That's
experience
great.
with it.
You're solution oriented, just like we are.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, Paul, you
Yes.
are literally the most positive person I've ever met.
Ah,
And I was just
thank
wondering,
you.
you are. You're just incredibly positive. I've never seen you
Thank
upset.
you.
I was just
Thank you.
wondering if there was ever a time in your life where you were depressed when you didn't have the knowledge that you have now.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because one of the biggest things for me was working with in terms of consciousness and especially inquiry work. Inquiry work is just any type of process where you really kind of reflect back on your own thinking patterns. There's a really great teacher, Byron Katie, who I think her stuff is great. Hers is like the simplest, most basic, but just powerful form of inquiry work, where you just ask yourself 4 questions. Whenever you have a thought that you're like, this doesn't really feel right, but this is what I believe is true, you can use these 4 questions to examine the thought, and then you do a turnaround. So, and that's really powerful. And there's like non-dual inquiry work that comes from Vedanta that's really pretty deep. But for me, what I've learned is that when I first started this whole thing about meditation and qigong and all of these things that I've been doing for, I don't know, 25 years or so, that I was really focusing on the positive, and anytime there'd be any kind of negative or whatever, I would just use techniques and things to kind of push it down, you know?
So you've
And
been this way a long time.
well, yeah, but the thing is, whenever there's like a feeling of anxiety or frustration or anger, and you push it down, then it's unresolved energy. And
Ah.
the thing with that is that where I'm at now is whatever feelings I have, I'll totally acknowledge, and I'll really work through. Okay, what is it that I'm actually experiencing right now in this moment? And of course, if I'm in conversation or if I'm out in the middle of something, I will just quickly take a quick note, like a mental note about what I'm thinking and feeling in that moment, and say, okay, I'm going to just really work with that later on. And a lot of times, what it is I can, later on when I'm, home or alone, have a few minutes alone, I can just kind of reflect on it and see, well, this energy is coming up for a reason. And the best way to honor, myself and this energy, this whole situation, is to really reflect on it and really understand at a deep level, what is this trying to tell me? And a lot of times it's actually pointing to a belief that actually doesn't really quite fit anymore. It's almost like if you put shoes on and your toe kind of hits the end of it, or you're putting something on, you're like, oh, this doesn't really fit anymore, and there's one part of it that just rubs the wrong way. Well, it's the same way when we hopefully through our lives are constantly expanding, and whenever there's something rubbing up against us, it's literally like a shoe or piece of clothing that doesn't fit anymore, that that little rub or that little thing is sort of a messenger telling us, hey, here's a belief that you have that is not really fitting you anymore. Just like an old pair of shoes or clothing, when you're younger, going through growth spurts and things like that. It's really kind of the same thing. So it's really just saying it's time for you to examine what this rub or this limitation or this feeling is trying to communicate to you. And in such a way, you can reflect back and really uncover it. And once you uncover that sort of limiting belief that you might not have ever really known on a conscious level, then all of that feeling disappears, and it's like, okay, yeah, the messenger can go because you got the message. So for me, it's
So
all
when
about
so when
honoring. Yeah.
so when I hear all of these people saying that Jews are the reason for everything bad, they're actually saying shoes are the reason for everything bad.
Right, exactly. Totally, but it's funny because that's the other thing too, is that there's a lot of consciousness that you can understand in terms of polarity, and a lot of the things that I've come to understand, I've understand through the use of geometry, like sacred geometry, and thinking about things like, okay, if I was going to lay something out visually or spatially, how would it look? It's like, if you like, one of the things that I thought of, and there's lots of cues with the way people talk, is people will say, okay, well, let's discuss something, let's talk about it. Well, the word about is another word for around. So if you're talking with someone about something, you're literally mentally and verbally with the another person, both together walking around something. Might not be like
Oh.
looking in the same direction, but hopefully you're walking together
Oh.
around something. It's like you're talking about it. But realization and just knowing is like you're in it, you know? So
Ah.
the thing about that is that there's the whole thing about a story, like what's the story about this, or what's the realization. And usually a story is like what you think about something or what you would say about something, and it's not really realizing the essence or the seed of the thing itself. So it's good to just kind of be non-attached to any individual piece of it and just allow yourself to hold all of it. Because in terms of polarity, so like what I was saying about geometries as ways to help to understand things, every time there's a light, there's a shadow. And a lot of times that's one of the things that's really powerful to work with in terms of inquiry work, because people that really pump themselves, like kind of artificially try to exert some type of image of being like, oh, of being especially beautiful or really strong or really smart or whatever it is. There's people that are naturally that way, who have an ease about whatever that is, and that's completely like a healthy, balanced way to do it. But if there's people that are really overtly trying to ram an idea down someone else's throat about how to perceive them, like strength or intelligence or whatever it is, then usually what that means is that they're trying that's a shadow, what Jung called a shadow. And it's like they're basically trying to help people see them in a way that they can't see themselves. It's like they will try to exert an impression of strength on you in proportion to how weak they feel within themselves, you
Wow.
know? And,
Wow.
so it's literally 180 degrees, which is another thing about geometry. Like, shadows a lot of times are reciprocal, like they're 180 degrees different. And there's a lot of things you can use geometries for to really understand things at a deep level, which my teacher, Drumvalo, his book, it's a 2-volume set, the Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, Volume 1 and 2 is like phenomenal, for that. There's so many things you can use in terms of using that to understand sacred geometry, and through understanding sacred geometry, apply that. The other thing too is that
Well, there's
another
a
thing. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say just one
That's
one
okay.
last
I was
quick.
just gonna say
Yeah,
there's a lot of that going on in the world today of
yeah,
that 180 degree,
right,
the what we call the parasitic inversion on this
right,
show, where everything
yeah,
has just kind of been flipped around.
right,
But that's very interesting what you say, and how to sort of make that inversion right again.
right, exactly. Yeah, and it's just, and I think that the biggest thing is just to just allow and have the state of consciousness that just expands and gets a little bit like a little bit larger, to take in the whole picture. And like there's like one of the things from there's an image from sacred geometry that's called the flower of life, and it's like from the title of the book, The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life. This is an ancient symbol, and how you would make the is you would use a compass, for example, draw a circle, and then you move the center to the top of the circle. You draw another circle, so it's two circles intersecting. Then you move, and that intersection is the center of the next circle, and you keep spiraling out. And how how I really learned to use that, see, drawing sacred geometry and all of these things can really have a significant effect on your pituitary gland and pituitary chakra in your head. But there's a lot of people that work with sacred geometry and they just draw it or they have it around it, but they don't actually really use it for anything. Other than that, I mean, that itself is good, especially if you're drawing it. It does have a beneficial effect on your brain. But I had an interesting experience when I was staying with my mother-in-law, and I was like, went and I helped her, do the dishes after we ate. And she had this way of doing dishes, and I wanted to do it the way she liked to do it because I'm in her house. So she had this thing of like, okay, both sides, the soaking and the cleaning and this whole thing. So basically, after I had done with the dishes, I lift the drain up, and I saw this little vortex of water. And it was this perfect, the water was going down at the right rate, but there's this perfect silvery little thread of a vortex. And I stood and I looked down to see how close I could look into it, to take all of the little details of this beautiful little spiraling thing while it lasted. And I realized that standing off to the side and looking down into it is the essence of what I was doing with like inquiry work. It's like with the flower of life, you draw one circle, and like the little needle of the compass is in the center, and the circle, the pen or pencil draws the circle around it. Then when you move the needle to the surface, you draw another circle. What that's doing is that's stepping outside of itself. And then I realized that was the same as the first, second, and third person perspectives, you know? And it's like, say, for example, you're in a crisis or you're so frustrated and you just like, I got to vent to somebody. There's no one, I'm backed in a corner. I really don't know what to do about this frustrating situation. And so the natural thing to do is call a friend. And if you are there talking with a friend and you're just spilling about this frustrating situation, what's happening is they're getting it from a second person perspective. So they're a little bit more objective because they're on the edge. It's basically on the edge of that circle. So that first movement from the center of the circle to the edge of the circle, that person is able to perceive all around you, like the whole circle where you're in the center of it, essentially. And then an objective third person is even more objective because they're watching the interaction between the two of you. And the way that these geometries spiral out, that's basically a model for how objectivity expands. And the more objective you can be about things, the more you can have an informed approach about whatever it is that you do. So that's why consciousness and awareness is one of the most important things to work with because it gives you a
Wow.
bigger circle
So you mentioned,
to draw from.
well, you mentioned the sacred geometry helping the pituitary chakra.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I wanted, actually, people talk about chakras a lot. I'm aware of the chakras, but I feel like it deserves more explanation. Can you
Oh,
go
yeah,
over the
absolutely.
chakra system? Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I'd be happy to. Well, it's interesting. The reason why I know that it influences the chakra is I teach a 4-day workshop, and there's these meditative practices that build on each other. And on the last day, there's this meditation called the creation process meditation, where there's this high level energetic thing happening between the heart and the brain. And what happens is people will have their eyes closed and there's a meditation mask on, so it's pitch black, but there'll be this illumination, this light from within their own consciousness. And then that means that the thalamus, I mean the thalamus in the brain is doing a certain specific thing. And then when those shift into geometries, that shows that the energy has spilled over into the pituitary chakra and the pituitary gland itself. And it will actually take that light and change it into geometries. So that's just one thing, just to show that these are not external things that we're superimposing on the body. It's something that's actually native to the body and part of the body, that because I'm not telling anyone to have these certain experiences, but when they describe them, it's all shows these universal patterns. But yeah, so just talking about the chakras really quickly, the chakras are basically just sort of the main line of the body. If you're sitting upright or standing upright from like the perineum or like the sort of the base of the torso up to the crown of the head, there's this straight column in the center. And a lot of different traditions will call it different things. It's been called the inner flute. My teacher calls it the prana tube. There's a lot of different people, will call it, different things. But really what it is there's these small little openings in it. And there's these energy vortexes that extend out from the front of the body and out from the back of the body. And what I knew them as before I started doing a lot of work, kind of deep work with the chakras, was I just knew of them as just these sort of energetic emanations. And I knew that each one of them corresponded to a certain level of consciousness. And from what I understood, that the lower chakras were quote unquote lower, and the higher chakras were quote unquote higher or more advanced or more transcendent. But and Carolyn Mace, who wrote Anatomy of the Spirit and Sacred Contracts and a number of other works, she said it was amazing when she started working with the chakras. She found that just people in normal everyday conversation, if they meet each other and kind of have the normal, you know, meeting at a party or meeting somewhere, kind of chit chat, is she realized that the conversations typically are relevant to the first chakra, and then they shift to the second, and then to the third, because the first one is about your
So can you
tribe, your
say what
family.
the
Mhm.
yeah, I wanted you to describe those lower chakras, where they're located and
Oh yeah,
what they
yeah,
pertain to.
absolutely. Yeah, so basically the lowest chakra is just very at the very bottom of the body, say like the perineum. So like sort of like basically between the legs, like the very base of the torso is like that lowest point is the perineum. And it's also that's really where the root chakra, and that's really about rootedness. It's about your family. It's like your connection with the world. It's very, very rooted, you know, rooted and tribal, basically. And it's about your survival. There's a lot of different, you know, correlations with each one of them. But when it comes to the second one, and there's always debate about where the different chakras are located, because some will say, oh, the second chakra is in this one place, and another place. Oh no, it's totally in the belly button, or it's below the belly button. There's all these disagreements, but really what it comes down to is that there's many chakras through the body, and each one of them, uh, there's ones that become more dominant than others depending on certain things. So, for me, when I was creating the chakra class, I teach a half-day workshop that I created on the chakras, and physiology, I found that the chakra system the upper chakras are a mirror image of the lower chakras.
Hmm.
And I could just briefly just talk about this. It's something I found that I hadn't really heard anywhere else before, but the so the root chakra is right in the perineum area. The second chakra is right where the pubic bone is. The third chakra is the right where the solar plexus is. The
Mhm.
the fourth is where the heart is, right in the sternum. The fifth is the throat chakra. It's right right in your throat. The sixth is right on your forehead, kind of the upper center of your forehead is called the third eye. That's the sixth chakra, and the seventh is the crown of the head. And when I was working through all of these people that had different accounts of things, and I was sensing energetically that there's different energies here and there in terms of location. But what I realized is that the lower chakras are more about your body. The upper chakras are about your mind, and your heart, right in the center, is what joins your body and your mind. And
Oh.
also it's about sort of love for another person, unconditional love, which is about relation between you and another person. So it's the most relational chakra, because it's yourself and others, but also two dimensions of yourself, your physicality and your mentality. And then I saw that basically there is this reflective symmetry when I was trying to pin down, well, which is really the most true thing to say about where the second chakra is? Because that's a big disagreement. The second chakra is one of the ones that has the most disagreement. But I realized if you start at the heart and you go up to the fifth chakra and you go down to the third chakra, the fifth chakra is about your voice and your will, and your third chakra is also sort of willful in a sense too, because it's about more of your personal power, your personal initiative, your ability to get up and go. If you look at the throat chakra, that notch at the throat, it's a notch pointing up. Your solar plexus right there in the front is a notch pointing down. They're reflectively symmetrical. And if you tap on that
Oh, it's
notch,
interesting.
yeah, if you tap on that notch where your throat is, it'll feel a little tender. You don't want to tap it too hard because it feels sensitive. If you tap on your solar plexus, it'll feel almost the same way. And then if you
That's
go
very
up to,
interesting.
yeah, and then if you go up to the sixth chakra, it's the forehead. And if you go down to your pubic bone, it's this rounded bony area that's really similar. And then what I call, the location for those is based on physiology. And then if you go up to the top of your head, and that sort of that ridge, that sort of the shape of the top of your head, and where the perineum is, they're almost reciprocals. Where the ridge of your head and there's sort of that natural ridge of the perineum, they're kind of reciprocals. So what I based my formulation of where the chakras are based on just physiological reciprocals, like that mirror symmetry going up and going down. But one of
So
the
you
things
talk about this in your, is this something that you go over in your chakra workshop? Is how
yes,
to
the chakra,
understand
yeah,
the chakras?
yeah, absolutely, yeah, the chakra workshop. The origin of the whole thing was I teach a little bit about the chakras in the workshop, the 4-day workshop, and it's just kind of a really small piece of the workshop itself. But I started realizing that I was like, oh, this might be something useful to teach in and of itself. And the more I did that, the more it expanded. And I realized that there's discrepancy for people about the directions the chakras rotate in. There's discrepancy about where they are, like where the chakras actually, the major 7 chakras in the body actually are. There's all these different discrepancies. So I just started going deeper into them, and then I started going deeper into the sense of what people normally do in terms of to keep their chakras healthy or balanced. And I have a background in music. I studied music in Boston. That's what I went to school for. And I started realizing that a lot of the chakra work that's out there could be categorized as tuning. But really, a lot of people are not teaching much beyond tuning. And if you're a musician, if you say, okay, I'm going to learn how to play the guitar, and all you do is learn how to tune it, and that's it, and you're like, okay, now the guitar is tuned,
Yeah.
I'm going to set it up against the wall. My work here is complete. I'm going to bow and leave the room. So I realized it's like, okay, well, what? And I said, okay, well, if we're going to use the analogy of someone playing an instrument, what's the analogy with music? And I realized that what you
Yeah.
need to do is first you have to understand how the instrument's laid out and how to tune it. And then after you know how it's laid out and you can tune it and you have a well-tuned instrument, then you play single notes. And then after you learn how to play single notes, you play chords. And I realized, and I kind of did a lot of inquiry work myself. I would go into meditation, and do all these different ways that I have of like getting information. And I would like ask, like check in to see if these different things were true, and if there was a paradox. It was two truths that seem contradictory, but only from a certain vantage point. If you change the vantage point, you can understand how they both may be different layers of each other or something like that. So what I ended up doing with the chakra class is the first half of the class that I teach is all about how to tune the individual chakras and how to tap into each one of them. Each one is actually its own center of consciousness and is actually a really brilliant, brilliant consciousness focused in a very specific area. And honestly, none of them are more advanced or higher or lower in terms of value than any other one. And how I use it is the lower chakras are more dense and the higher chakras are more airy. And a lot of times
I like
people
that
think,
non-judgmental attitude about it because a lot of
yeah,
people say the lower chakras is a lower way of thinking. And I've
right,
thought
yeah.
that myself, in fact.
Yeah, well, it's like you could say, okay, well, maybe those people have family issues. They're like, your root
Oh,
chakra is connected to your family.
oh,
Like, oh,
who
Thanksgiving is
doesn't?
thanks. What does Thanksgiving feel like versus how does meditating in a cave feel like? They say one's better than the other. You know, but
Right.
so basically, it's like it's I think in terms of density. So if the further you go down in the atmosphere, the higher the atmospheric pressure is. The higher you go, the thinner the pressure is. If you go down to the very deep pool or down into the water, you're going to feel a lot of pressure from that water because it's just more dense. There's nothing better or worse about it. It's just more dense. So what I started doing was really tapping into each one of these centers and kind of you can actually start. It might sound strange, but you can actually start dialoguing with them. You can actually, because they are centers of consciousness, in the first half of the workshop, it's basically connecting with and understanding and balancing these, getting them healthy and functioning properly. And then it's saying, these are 7 like brilliant experts that are masters of these different areas of consciousness. And say, for example, when I was feeling a little overwhelmed, I had a bunch of projects I was working on. I loved all of them, but it was a lot to do at one time. And I had one of the most amazing dialogues or conversations I've ever had with about that with my root chakra. And I was basically communicating in a sense with my root chakra. And I basically said about the overwhelm and like what could you have to say about this? And my root chakra basically said, your work is only what's in your hands moment by moment, and let everything else go. And it also said, you think your home is your whole entire structure you live in, but it's only the floor under your feet and the roof over your head moment by moment. So like
Well,
that.
haven't you moved like 25 times?
I know. I should have gave it to my root chakra and told it about that. But yeah. But it's one of those things where it's each one of them is their own brilliant mind focused on a certain area. And then when you get into the second half of the workshop, and this is something I really haven't seen other places, is you can start working with activating your individual chakras. So in towards the end of the first half, we start working with how to amplify and really activate and really play those individual notes, or those chakras. And then when you get into the second half, it's finding combinations of amplifying the energy of the different chakras, and they each produce a very distinct state of energy, emotion, and consciousness. And it's basically like just how each thing, like a C major chord or E minor chord or whatever, have very different feelings, very different sound or tonality to it. It's the same thing, but it's a state of consciousness instead of an audible sound. And that's one of the things that I thought
D
was really
minor is the
interesting.
saddest.
That's not true,
D minor
actually.
is the
Oh, what's that?
saddest of all the
It's
keys.
actually it's actually it's actually B flat minor.
Well,
Right,
I
right.
but
found.
Nigel Tufnell thinks it's D minor.
Oh yeah, right,
Well,
yeah. Is that before or after he
well,
turns it
no,
up to 11,
well, the question is,
Yeah,
I don't think he's ever played a C sharp 7 sharp 5 sharp 9. So
right. Yeah, yeah.
that's really nice.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So, but the thing is that it's like, and it was kind of in developing the workshop, I used what I know about NLP in terms of like understanding that when you just shift and change certain things, mentally or visually or whatever, or with your physiology, you have a different energetic result. So I started really playing with the chakra system, and I really understood this is an instrument. It's just an instrument of consciousness. It's a
Yeah.
emotional mental state instrument that you play individual. You emphasize certain notes or certain centers or certain groupings of them, and that creates a very distinct. And you can create, music with your basically your states, like whatever state you choose to be in. There's certain ways you can amplify different chakras, and I identified like the last half, like the very end of the chakra workshop. I talk about like a handful of ones I found really helpful for different states, like healing with like working with like emotional difficulty, or working with creative projects, or there's a certain cycle of like moving almost like more like an arpeggio with like goal setting. Like there's this certain flow of these three chakras that cycle that is phenomenal for setting goals. And but it's just learning to play an instrument. That's all it is.
So you talk about the states of consciousness in
Yeah.
daily life and how you can
Oh
work
yeah.
with different states of consciousness. So how
Yeah.
do you apply this, day to day when
Yeah.
maybe you're in the middle of doing something and you can't necessarily meditate, you're out and about. How do
Right.
you apply the playing of the chakra system?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in this first half of the workshop, there's a process I do where people can practice being in a certain center or relating from a certain center. So that's kind of really specific to the chakra workshop itself. It's in terms of how you can activate and play different kind of music in a sense, like whatever is the most useful type of music for that whatever situation you're in, you can just activate that. One of the things that I've found useful just in daily life in terms of the different states of consciousness is sort of what I was talking about the like the flower of life expanding out in that sort of vortex, and that the first, second, and third person perspective. It's really the same kind of thing as the chakras. Is the first person perspective is almost like your root chakra. It's very the most dense. If you have an emotional trauma and you are trying to communicate this to your friend, your friend might have a high level of empathy, but they're probably not going to be able to feel it to the same extent that you feel it. They're going to feel it in a more rarefied, sort of thinner, higher atmospheric way, in a sense, if that makes sense. And then a third
Yeah.
person who's just a witness, just standing there waiting for the bus or whatever, watching you two talk about stuff, is might not have any investment in like trying to help you feel better or helping you get they're just pure witness. And that's a third person perspective, and that's more objective than either one of them. But what happens is any one of those points of view, the more density there is, the more visceral reality there is to it. The second person is less viscerally real and just really, more expanded and more objective, but less of that visceral sense. So it's not like you're gaining or losing anything, you're just shifting. And the third person is more objective, standing back, taking it all in, is more like the pure witness consciousness. And actually, NLP is according to them, they say this, and I actually agree that we always deal with first, second, and third person in grammar when we're learning English, but they say that the fourth person's perspective is about systems, is about seeing things as a flowing system. But in daily life, I feel like it's a matter of embracing that individuality and embracing that sort of visceralness of life, while at the same time sort of dancing the dance of expanding consciousness. Because there's people that just want to go higher and higher and more rarefied and higher atmosphere in terms of consciousness, like how that applies to consciousness, and some that just dig right in. Like those people that you say, oh, they're dug in. Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. But
Yeah.
but so basically, I use the first, second, and third person perspective in terms of
Mhm.
like the chakras, and to say, okay, what's the most useful thing? And it's interesting too, because in terms of most people, different people have different understandings of spirit or spirituality, or if they choose to have a religion. There's a really brilliant writer named Ken Wilber. It's one of my favorite writers about philosophy, and he basically says that all of the spiritual traditions basically lie in like three different areas. Either they generally are ascending and say the world is sinful and bad and awful and whatever, completely non-visceral, and they're just trying to shoot up and out of here. They're like, where's the elevator out of this hellhole? They just want to shoot up, and they are
That's
basically
so interesting
ascending.
that you that you bring it up
Yeah.
because so many of us do want to just go out of our bodies
Right.
and go off into
Yeah.
the ethers, but
Yeah.
the fact is we're still here.
Yeah.
So we're
Exactly.
still we're stuck here right now.
Well,
And
yeah, exactly.
actually,
Yeah. Oh,
if
sorry,
you
go
don't
ahead.
mind if I change gears just a little, I
No,
just
not
want to
at all.
change gears just a little bit
Oh,
because
not at all.
one of the other things that you're really knowledgeable about is how to care for your 3D body,
Right.
and you've got the detox solutions, and you were the person that introduced us to MMS.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I I just wanted to have you talk a little bit about some of the work that you do on the physical plane in order to stay healthy so that you can work with all these different dimensions of consciousness.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I do just a little bit of, I don't do anything really officially with MMS. I don't like offer it. I just kind of make it myself. I basically got it and I started having experiences with it. I taught a workshop and I had a student there who shared it with me, and I did some muscle testing, dowsing with a pendulum. I just really energetically felt this is something that my body really was clearly like, yes, get this. And I tried it, and I had really great results with it. And immediately, I had three friends who had healing crises, like different types of crises happening. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to visit one and give them half of what I had, and then find a source where I can actually get the crystals together and sort of uh, learn how to just make it myself. So I don't do it. I don't really sell it or anything like that, but I just go and I just am able to make it now. So it's easy for me to just give out bottles to people because you can make
Oh,
quite a bit of
so
it.
you're literally making it. I didn't realize. I thought that you bought the
Yeah.
two components. So the two components are
Sodium chlorite.
sodium
Sodium
chlorite,
chloride? Yeah,
right,
and
and
citric
citric
acid.
acid.
Yeah, and
So
citric
how are
acid.
you making it?
Yeah, well, you can get sodium chloride crystals. I just found a chemical supply place that had it, and it was the right grade that Jim Humble, who has some of the great information about it. He
Yes,
was,
he's
you
the
know,
guy that
I basically
discovered it.
just yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just followed his directions on how to do it, and basically it's really pretty simple. You just can get the crystals. You can go to our friends at India Sweets and Spices, and they have
Yes.
they have the citric acid powder in packets. So if you get the sodium
Oh,
chloride,
they do? I
yeah,
didn't realize
yeah,
that.
yeah, that's just a little white.
They have
The
all sorts of useful stuff over
Yeah,
there.
including insulated tiffins.
Yes, useful and confusing stuff and amazing, beautiful things, you know. But but if you get the stuff, it looks like sugar basically, but it's just granulated citric acid. And Jim Humble, his site has information about how to do it, but he has an ebook you can get and things like that that talk about to do it by weight, the percentages by weight, and then all you really do is just mix it at a certain temperature with glass and wood. As long as it doesn't have any contact with metal, it's fine. And then you store it in like a #1 plastic bottle, so like soda bottles or that type of clear, not the HDPE2 bottles. It's like the #1 bottles that that soda is normally sold in. So
Okay.
and it's funny because I never really get soda, but whenever my wife's family visited and someone got a soda, I was like, oh, I need that bottle for MMS. Like I don't get soda, so I need to jump on my opportunity
Yeah, we don't
for
drink
those
soda
bottles.
either.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, well, I'm
Yeah,
just gonna put MMS in it. Uh, but
that's
yeah,
great.
so but that's the thing too, is that a lot of times, and teaching the workshop that I do, a lot of times I get people that are very ascending focused. Like I want to learn how to ascend. I want to get up higher states of consciousness and forget about the body. But it's kind of getting back to what we said earlier about shadow work, about people not being willing to confront and fully engage in a way to transform the stuff that feels uncomfortable to them about physicality. And there's lots of solutions like MMS, and there's a lot of really great things you can do to help with the physicality, because a lot of times people will say, oh, what's causing the problem, this or this? But if you really take a step back, most of the time there's a closed circuit. A lot of times things will flow in a cycle or in a system. And if people just look at one aspect of it, they'll say, oh, well, my body sucks, so I got to get the hell out of here. Or they'll do things like
Yeah.
shadowy type things like compensation and projection and all these different things to just have the consciousness avoid the source of the problem. So basically, it's like if you embrace and love the body as the messenger that it can be, then it's one of the greatest things to serve your consciousness. People that might feel frustrated with their day-to-day life, or they might have family troubles, or whatever it is, you can say, well, what's the divine messenger in this? What is the message that this feeling that I have in my body is trying to tell me about with my family? So if you really embrace the body and do the best you can to do MMS and all the things that help the body feel strong and clear, it will be a better antenna and will be a better relayer of signals to you about other things that are going on. So if you find those, like we were saying earlier, is those beliefs that don't fit you anymore, that discomfort, if you are in a very, low energy state body that's very, struggling to get out of bed in the morning and all of these things, it can be very difficult. It's like a TV set that doesn't really have a good picture. You're not really getting all of the information. So if you can clarify the physical
So,
body, then you can get clear signals about what's happening spiritually and mentally, emotionally, on all these other levels.
so Paul, when is your next workshop?
Oh, yes, I have a workshop. It is coming up. It's called Awakening the Illuminated Heart. It is actually coming up pretty soon. It's coming up on the 18th, and then it's the 24th through the 26th.
So, is this in Los Angeles?
It is. Yeah, it's in Los Angeles. I am currently teaching primarily in Los Angeles, San Diego, and the San Francisco Bay Area. I've taught in San Francisco itself a number of times. I'm in the middle of putting together workshops, in the like East Bay, and I've gone down to San Diego. But I'm in the process of developing some other smaller group type things like meetup things about sacred geometry and how to actually use sacred geometry in daily life. Just short little hour and a half type classes through
Mhm.
like Meetup. I don't have anything that on my site yet, but that is something that's going to be coming up soon. But you know, I I feel like there's so much amazing stuff that that's going to really be helpful. And some people, the best fit for them is to do a 4-day workshop, and some people it's a half a day chakra workshop, or some it's like a short little hour-long thing about sacred geometry and how to use that for your consciousness. So there's a lot of stuff coming. A lot of there's a few things out there, a lot of stuff coming, and I just keep taking notes and writing as best I can.
Is your workshop on Saturday during the day?
Yes, it is. It's from 9 a.m. till 6 p.m.
Oh,
So
okay. So then right afterwards they can come to our event. So they can do
oh,
both. Everyone can come to
nice.
both.
Awesome.
Yeah. So you've got a workshop from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m.
6
on
p.m.
Saturday the 18th
Yeah,
in LA.
in LA. Yeah, and then it's a 4-day workshop. So I'm able. The school is said it's fine to separate out the first day, so that way, if people work on regular Monday through Friday job, they'd really only have to take 1 day off instead of taking 2 days
Oh, that
off.
works.
A lot of people do 4 days in a row, but I like to separate out the first day because I give I give homework. It's very nice homework, but it's still homework. Like, okay,
Yeah.
experiment with the stuff that we do in the first day, and practice on your own, and that way people can get a good base of practice behind them, so that when they show up the next Friday, it's that following Friday, and they do Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And also
All
too
right. So
in
Paul,
LA,
is this on
yeah,
your website too?
it is.
Is this
Yes,
all the information on your site? And that's
yes.
paulreimers.com.
Yes, yeah, and
Is that right?
it's
Okay.
Reimers. It's because I say it's Reimers, but it's the German pronunciation, so it's kind of the opposite. And my best friend growing up, his last name was Siebert. It's Siebert. So everyone called him Seibert and me Reimers, and we were like, oh, if we could just switch pronunciations, we'd be golden. So
Okay. So you are Paul Reimers or Paul Reimers? I always say Reimers.
it's funny. I get Reimers most of the time, Reimers occasionally, and every once in a while, just for fun, I get a Ramirez thrown at me. It's funny.
Really? Okay, that's
Whole
good.
different
Well,
continent. No, it's amazing.
well, we should do events together sometime, but
Yeah. Oh,
it's
that'd be
cool that your
awesome.
event and ours are both on the same day. Maybe
Yeah.
everyone can go enjoy your workshop, and
Yeah.
then on the evening of the 18th, I'm doing a talk with Dean Ryan in
Awesome.
Bel Air
All
at
right.
Longevity Pure Medicine. So that should be
That's
really
awesome.
nice.
Oh, that'd be
So
awesome.
check out paulreimers.com for more information on Paul's upcoming chakra workshops. Now, Paul, you studied with Drunvalo Melchizedek.
Yes, that's right.
Is that right?
Yes.
Who is Drunvalo Melchizedek?
Well, basically, you know how there's a lot of people who, you know, like say for example, like Krishna Das. Someone will have like Krishna Das or Sanatana Kaur, and it's like those are kind of spiritual names. Those are kind of given names, by a spiritual lineage. And it's funny because when I was first starting to do meditation and qigong, there's like all these different people with these like really exotic sounding names, and I was just like, I would see some people that have like a very long exotic Indian sounding name, and I'm like, all right, you're lighter, you're whiter than I am, your name's probably Bob, or whatever, when you were born. But then then I started realizing that was really before I understood like spiritual names. So it's sort of like you have essentially sort of like a rebirth into saying, okay, well, there was the life before for my family and sort of the tribe, that's sort of first chakra, more density kind of related thing. That's the family I came from, gave me, my sort of my given name, and then just sort of having a spiritual experience and feeling like that you're beginning to start a new phase of your life, and that
Okay.
the spiritual is important enough to say, okay, well, I'm actually going to change my name, and have it reflect my spiritual practice, and
Like
Drunvalo,
Ram Dass,
exactly, yeah, exactly, right,
Richard Alpert.
yeah, right, yeah, totally. But so yeah, Drunvalo basically, it's interesting that he was given that spiritual name, and the first name is actually Drumbalo, is a Druid name, and Melchizedek is basically sort of a spiritual lineage. And but it's really interesting because one of the things I love so much about Drumbalo, and I've had the good fortune of training with him multiple times. I trained with him in Sedona. I've trained with him in Mexico, and he's just an amazing person. Just a really sweet, heart-centered, amazing person. And but one of the things I really love about him is that he is not, just sort of what we were talking about before with like the chakras and states of consciousness. He's not one of these up in the air, like, oh, it's all about, you know, the, ascension and all about this high, the high rarefied thin air type of thing. He's basically works with indigenous tribes to understand their spiritual traditions. He's worked with cognitive scientists who sort of will do brain mapping and map, like put all the electrodes on the head. And he did a really, a lot of intensive work that way too. He's worked with, just a lot of different people that all brought something else to his understanding. So he's not one of these people that just sort of has one channel going. He's got a lot that are opened up that says, indigenous people have a lot of really powerful deep truth, but it's not the entire picture. And science has a lot of truth, but it's not the whole picture. But when you put them all together, it's like the same thing we were talking about with the chakras, or about sort of like the ascending spiritual traditions or the descending ones. And it's like, say for example, the ascenders will want to get up and out. The descenders are basically saying the truth of reality is about life on earth, and let's fully embrace this physicality. And so like the pagan traditions like Wicca and other ones that are earth centered are all about descending. Whereas like, say for example, like Tibetan Buddhism or Tantra will be, say for example, integral, which it's ascends in such a way that you descend and then embrace all of physicality, but with the depth of consciousness where you see and understand all of it, So it's not judging, it's just completely flowing and being with all of it. So I know that was kind of
That's
like
such
a
a great way
little
to,
bit of
to describe
tangent.
it because we often are putting these judgments on,
Well, yeah.
physical life. I do it too. I actually, say, oh, that's just 3D stuff.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I,
Yeah, but it's
yeah.
funny because it's like that quote unquote dead end job, or that relative that just really grates your nerves or whatever. They could be giving you one of the most powerful lessons you've ever had, but it's the resistance to that, it's the frustration with it that is just the abrasive or the separation that's keeping you from understanding it. And one of the ways I like to understand that is there's actually in the physical body, there's a circuit that goes. So we talked about the prana tube or the bamboo, the inner flute, whatever you'd want to call it, running through the core of the body. But there's also an energy circuit running up the back of the body and then down the front of the body. One runs from the perineum up to the top of the head and down to the roof of the mouth. The other is you can touch the tongue to complete that circuit. It runs down the front of the body. The one up the back of the body is called the governing vessel, and the down the front is called the conception vessel. And the one in the front is more feminine, and the one in the back is more masculine. And the one in the back is ascending; it moves energy up primarily, and the one in the front is descending. So if you look at sort of the more of the ascending spiritual traditions, a lot of it is masculine based. A lot of it is sort of world and physicality denying, or saying that sex is evil or the body is evil or whatever. A lot of that is kind of really kind of patriarchal and masculine, and it's just flowing
Yeah.
up and out of here. But then there's the flowing, welcoming, embracing, loving physicality, loving beautiful experiences that are possible here on earth, and that's in the front of the body. That's sort of the descending. And basically when you put them all together, it's possible to flow in such a way that you can fully embrace the witness consciousness, rarefied, thin atmosphere type experience, but also the bare bones, like deep dug in the earth type of thing. And I had a really interesting
Well,
experience with that.
oh, Paul, we're actually almost out of time, so
Oh,
I
That
okay.
is a great place
it
to
is a
end,
great way to,
actually.
Okay.
and I do want you to get a chance to
Oh,
tell
sure.
us your website again
Oh,
and when
absolutely.
your
Yeah.
events and where.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Um, yeah, I definitely love to talk. For the 4-day
Oh,
workshop,
it's
I talk
great.
all 4 days. I mean, there's a lot of interaction, but I do kind of talk a lot. So, but yes, so the website is paulreimers.com, and that's just Paul, last name Reimers, .com. And there's actually something I put together for listeners of your show, because I mean, I love you guys. You guys are great. Your listeners are great, and I just wanted to do something that would kind of like thank
All
them
right.
for. Yeah, I was just going to say
Well,
thank
we're
you
out
for
of
listening.
time, Paul.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay, so Paul, you have some kind of discount you're offering to listeners of the show?
Yes, I was just going to say that
They can come to your website, hopefully, or our website, and we can talk about it. But we have to. We're out of time now.
Yeah. It's just paulreimers.com.
Okay.
There's this thing called sessions. You'll find that there. There's a discount of $111 down to $55 for listeners of the show.
Awesome, Paul. Thank you so much for being with us today. You've been listening to The Human Frequency on American Freedom Radio. Please check out paulreimers.com and thekembo.com. Thanks for listening, and see you again next week.